Hello and welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. As always, good to see you, Clyde. My day is made when I see you. I'm going to jump right into this because it's a lot of information I want to share today. And I want to make sure that it's understood why I'm doing it this way and what I'm doing. I'm, I'm going to deal with how racism was kept alive in America after the uncivil war, the war between the states, or the Civil War, as it's been called. But I want to do it in such a way that it allows, especially young people, to get a better understanding of what is going on now, the history of where we are now. Because I would say it's pretty much understood that there was racism and what's problematic in a way is that there's a lot of folks, especially younger people, who think that there was a couple of things that signified racism. You know, black and white water fountains and a little bit of segregation here and there. But there's no real understanding of all the forces that were at work against black people. What we got to understand is um, the the Jim Crow era, it helped perpetuate racism and allowed it to flourish. Um, and what happened was that, see, after the Civil War, there was a period of time where, especially radical Reconstruction, when a lot of black folks thought, well, we have finally broken through and we can end this racism. And that 12-year period of radical Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, we did some phenomenal things. And if you can check it for yourself, we built so many schools and businesses and institutions and elected so many people to local and statewide and even federal offices. Um, just all kinds of things. Patented more inventions than any other period before or since. But there was a white backlash that was so crippling that it ended up taking us backwards to actually a period worse than slavery in some respects. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. So I wanted to give an overall picture of just how many forces and how many things were working against us. Now, some people may find this depressing, but I want to make sure that you understand that it's not meant to be depressing because we fought through these things. We fought through them. We still fighting through them. We will continue to fight through them, especially if we know the history. So I want to deal with some specific ways in which racism was kept alive and in some cases flourished in the United States after the Civil War. The first, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't start with these bastards, and that is the Ku Klux Klan. And what we need to understand is that the Ku Klux Klan, there were several white supremacist organizations after the Civil War, but none was more notorious and more prolific than the Ku Klux Klan. Um, and it actually started in Tennessee in 1865, 1866, or whatever. But it was the brainchild of six ex-Confederate officers, and it was about terrorizing black people and Republicans. And understanding that this is not the Republican Party we see today. This was the Republican Party of Lincoln. Uh, and they didn't just do it in the South, they were all over the country. They wore the white robes in order to uh, symbolize or to invoke the ghost of the Confederacy. This is important key too. They didn't just wear the robes and the hoods to hide themselves. It was that they were they were invoking a ghost. Think about what we think of as ghosts, right? It, white, basically people in sheets, right? But that's what the Ku Klux Klan. That's why they wore the white robes, is to give a ghost-like appearance. And they also changed the political landscape in the South because they oh, it was vicious. You know, not just the lynchings but the lynchings, the burnings, the rapes, everything you can think of. It was a program of domestic terrorism. They also did something else. They pushed what is called the lost cause mythology. The lost cause mythology. I'll get to that in a minute, but I want you to remember that phrase, the lost cause, because that is still with us today. The lost cause. But anyway, the Klan, which, like I say, their program was a program of domestic terrorism. They burned and bombed churches and homes and killed people and lynched people and all of that. But they weren't the only ones. Like I say, they were the major one. Okay. The red shirts is another one that was really strong in the South. And they just that red shirts. And they specifically went after folks that were trying to vote or were progressive black folks. They were really bad about that. Uh, and it was a paramilitary, an out, you know, outward paramilitary group. Okay, because the Klan operated somewhat secretively, but the red shirts were out front. They didn't even play with it. They said, no, 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 no. We what do they look like today? When you see those folks that, what they call them, those folks that do that uh, stuff, go out in the forest and practice being, what do you call them, Clyde? Those folks that try to pretend that they're survivors and all that stuff. So that was the red shirts. Now, I want to talk for a minute about the lost cause. The lost cause was I'm going to give you a word here. The lost cause mythology. It was an American historical negationist ideology. The new word is negationist, like negate, negationist ideology. And what it believed, what it was about was the idea that even though the Confederacy lost the Civil War, the cause of the Confederacy was a just and heroic one, and it endorsed the supposed virtues of the antebellum South, that of slavery and everything else, and it views the war as a struggle primarily for the Southern way of life or states' rights. And let's be very clear, these are deniers. They deny that the Civil War was over slavery. They deny that it was that it was caused by these states seceding from the United States. The way this theory plays is that the North was aggressively trying to force a different way of life on them. Okay, and you'll see it even today. The deniers, whenever they do all these different kinds of reenactments and all of this stuff, the South will rise again and all that crap. And you see this graphic here from Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is a movie that plays into the lost cause negation ideology. And if you want, you can put skinhead. No, 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 not skinheads. Uh, the survivors and stuff. That's a real deep embedded philosophy or ideology. Okay, you see the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the United Confederate Veterans, and all of that. They even pushed the idea that there were lots and lots of black people who fought for the South, you know. But you understand why that's so important is because that's how it kept racism alive after the Civil War. Because when they use that phrase, the South will rise again, when they talk all that stuff, that's the same stuff that Trump says and what those right wingers are saying when they say, take America back. Okay? Make America great again. When was it ever great for us? All right? So understand that the lost cause negation ideology was a key part of keeping racism alive. And of course, one of the most vicious parts of the domestic terrorism program was lynchings. And, we're becoming more aware of it now. But understand something about lynchings. Around 1890, going forward from there, virtually every single week, 2 to 3 black people were lynched somewhere in America. Think about that. And so, in that period of time, it went all the way actually down to the 1960s. There was still lynchings going on, and now we've changed it from hangings to police shooting you. But the lynchings on the trees and the burnings and all that stuff, 2 to 3 black people every single week for about 40 years, at least a good 30 years. And the count that the folks got now is over 4,000 something people. Well, that's a terrorism campaign. That's exactly what that is. That's a terrorism campaign. That's what it exists for. And we need to understand how, again, think about all the things I've covered already. Add to it lynchings, because these were going on at the time. These were what you had the red shirts and the KKK and the Lost Cause and all of that stuff, right? And in the process of all that, you got lynchings going on. When you see these pictures of thousands of people would come out for lynchings like it was entertainment. Look at this. How do you do that? And understand what they were doing. They not only hang you, they beat you, they shoot you, they stab you, they cut you, uh, burn you, and then hang your burn body up on lampposts and just sick trees and sickness. That graphic right there that we just left, that was Marion, Indiana. That wasn't in the South. This was out. I think this one is in out west. So understand, and there was no shame. That's how come they took pictures and they were proud to be in the pictures. Marion, Illinois, Indiana. They were happy to be photographed. Okay? That's when they hung a woman. All right, let me move past that, but that's something that I don't play lightly because it was so pervasive. And white people don't like for you to mention lynchings. Okay, look at that. That's a headline from a paper. 3,000 will burn Negro. All right, another area that was extremely important in terms of this was the convict leasing programs. Convict leasing. chain gangs, etc. Uh, the chain gangs, which is the term that we got from the media, they talk about chain gangs. In fact, what was it, Sam Cooke? Uh, I've been working on the chain gang. That's the sound of the men working on the chain gangs all day long. They're saying, that the concept was chain gangs. And what that put out was the idea that these were convicts, these were criminals, okay? And that's been embedded in our minds that chain gangs essentially was, it might have been primitive, but these were criminals. When we got a better understanding of what the convict leasing programs were and how they worked, then we were better able to understand that, you know, thousands of black people, men and women, were not criminals. They were criminalized. When you understand that, for an example, right there, it could be black people in the South could be jailed indefinitely for such crimes as, and this one is real deep, vagrancy. You know, I had heard of vagrancy my whole life, but I didn't understand what it was until started learning about the convict leasing programs. Vagrancy is simply not being able to prove you have a job. Think about this. This is after slavery ended, or chattel slavery ended. Okay? And now you have a situation where you got hundreds of thousands of black people who are no longer chained to the plantation. And you have thousands and thousands of black people looking for their family members who have been sold all around the country and all throughout the South. So you had people that as soon as they could find a way, they went looking for their people. Um, Now, what does that create? It creates a situation where you have thousands of people, black people, newly freed, but they have a goal. They have something they're working on. They're trying to get to wherever they thought the last place that their people was at, whether it's their wife or their husband or their children or their parents. And so they created a law called vagrancy. And it simply says, if you cannot prove that you have a job, you are a vagrant and you can be arrested and jailed. In most places, up to a year. But now here's where the twist comes in. The convict leasing program allowed farmers and anybody, any white person, to come and lease you out of the jail, pay the county a fee, and then they have possession of you, supposedly for X amount of time, and they could work you anywhere they wanted you to. And they didn't just work on farms, they worked in mines, they worked in turpentine farms, and that's where they took them out in the woods and they made turpentine. That was some very dangerous stuff. Working in the mines, talking about coal mines. Okay? Hundreds of black people died in the coal mines. And the reason why it was worse than slavery in some respects is that you leased these so-called criminals, convicts. You could work them to death because you did not own them. If one died, you just went and got another. See, in slavery, they owned the body of the slave, so it was in their best interest to keep them alive. But with convict leasing, nah, I don't care. I'll work them to death. Go get another one. That was vicious. Coal companies. It was. They helped build the railroads. See, we know the railroads going east and west were primarily built by Chinese, but they never talk about the railroads that went north and south. And all throughout the South, convict leasing programs were used to get black folks that built the railroad tracks. There's a graphic right there. Okay, they're building the railroad tracks in the South. And I'll mention this real quick. Um, there's a scene. There's a part of is it Color Purple? I think it is. Where no, I think it's Color Purple. But anyway, Oprah is in the movie, and I may be wrong about the movie, but anyway, there's a scene in this movie with Oprah where she insults a white woman, and she's knocked down by the white woman's husband, and it can't be a Color Purple, but anyway, because she tells her children and everybody to run, get away, they lock her up, Oprah, and then the next day, the white woman that she insulted, she goes to the jail and convict leases her and leases her and takes her home with her and makes her work in her house. Okay? That was convict leasing, although it's not explained there and we didn't know how widespread this was. So, whenever you figure out what movie it is, that's what that was about. And they took men, women, and children. That's why you see these graphics of these folks in the. We know those stripes, right? We all know those stripes, chain gangs and stuff. That's convict leasing. Okay. Now, another area, of course, was the black codes. And the black codes were actual laws on the books, um, black codes and pig laws. Um, Let me see if I can read some of these. The black codes were just that, they were laws. Many southern states passed local laws which restricted the freedom of black people. And they had Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina, probably North Carolina too. And they had all kinds of restrictions. Some of them were crazier. And see, these were harsher than the Jim Crow laws because these were actually encoded. A lot of Jim Crow was custom. But I mean, you think about it. My grandfather used to talk about this that they used to have barrels. They used to have barrels on the corners. My grandfather said they were laughing barrels. It was a color purple. Thank you, Clyde. It was a color purple. Okay. Um, my grandfather talked about how they had these barrels on the corners, and they were called laughing barrels. And this was because a black person better not laugh at nothing that happens to a white person. So, say for an example, a white person walking down the street walks into a pole or trips and falls. You better not laugh. So you would run over in the laughing barrel, stick your head in the barrel, and I guess they had water in there. So you stick your head in there and you laugh into the water, so that you couldn't be heard laughing. And I used to think that he was joking, but over the years, as I've seen some of the black codes and some of the stuff that we were told we better not do, I have no doubt that there were laughing barrels. Because if you can think about all the stuff that was illegal, and here's where it's so deep. We have had in the last, 2 years, this whole thing, this phenomenon called white people calling the police on black people for doing ordinary things. Okay? And we find this to be so amazing. We say, what is wrong with these white people? Because as the memes have gone out and we've seen them for everything, right? Calling the police on black people for walking, breathing, having barbecues, driving, whatever. And then we had already grown used to the idea of the police stopping you, you know, driving while black, walking while black, jumping up while black, all of that, right? What is that? That's simply an outgrowth of what they already knew. What would cause these white people to jump up and call the police for a black person sitting up in the dormitory, uh, on an open dormitory, taking a nap while they was out there studying? What would cause the police to? What would cause a white person to call the police on a black person trying to get into a pool in a complex where they live? What would cause a white person to call the police on a black person they see trying to get into a building that they have a key to and demand to see, you don't live here? Yes, I do. No, I don't believe you live here. Well, here's my key. And a white woman would follow a black man all the way up to his door. Now that's pretty bold, because if you think about it, what is it that the white folks always pretend that they so afraid of black people? White women so scared of black men, but she gonna follow the dude all the way to his door? You see, that's an outgrowth or continuation of the same system that had the black codes. It's the same system. Okay, you follow me? That's why they can do it so easily. That's why it's so easy for them to decide what black folks could or shouldn't do. That's how come it can break out all across the country. And as I said before, to me, it's part of the process of taking us backwards. Because if you make us feel so unwelcome going to the store, walking down the street, trying to buy something, trying to do these things, then what happens is we start not going, not doing. And that brings segregation back, because they've made it. That's how do you think they got us in that way in the first place? Because they would lynch us, they would burn us, they would arrest us if we tried to do things, go into a store, a public store. Don't you know that you people got to go around to the back? Okay? We'll serve you out the back window. That's where that stuff comes from. The same stuff. All right. Another area, and this was a deep one too, was scientific racism. Scientific racism, or eugenics. Uh, Scientific racism, believe it or not, was actually pretty huge, because it was used to justify the codes, the laws. Um, Scientists, social scientists, anthropologists, uh, not just here in the United States, but all across the Western world, attempted to classify and typify race, type it up. Uh, in other words, they believed that every race had certain innate characteristics. And of course, in their view, black people was the bottom of the tree, of the human tree. And it became so strong in terms of the scientific racism was the basis of eugenics. And you have to understand, if you never studied anything about eugenics, I would say definitely you want to do that, because eugenics was some racist. It said that some people should not be allowed to procreate because they were the bottom of the human tree, and This is a subject of great debate among some black people. The woman who the woman who started Planned Parenthood, what was her name? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Uh, she was a eugenicist, as were a lot of wealthy white people were in that day, including the father of the guy who owns Microsoft, one of the richest men in the world. His father was a eugenicist publicly. He was part of the eugenics movement. Yeah, look it up. Um, and of course, eugenics, which Hitler got from here, from the United States, is part of scientific racism. And he used that information as part of his deal to create, uh, his whole plan of getting rid of Jews. And it wasn't just Jews. And I'll say this again for those who might have missed it in an earlier presentation or never heard this. Do the math. If you look up any historical stuff about World War II and the Nazis and the Holocaust, you will see that there were the figure that's always used is the 6 million Jews. But when you look at the total number of people who were killed, it was 12 million. So if the Jews were 6 million, who was the other 6 million? Because you never hear anything about that. Well, that was a whole bunch of other folks. Anybody who was considered non-Aryan, and that of course included black people, because there were black people in Europe. But if you were handicapped, if you were blind, if you were deaf, gay men, uh, all kinds of folks. So 6 million other people were killed. So it was much bigger than they like to talk about. Uh, they just focus on the Jews and the Holocaust. And just like you have in the lost cause in the United States, a denier, a denial of different things, like I say, they denied it was over slavery and all of that. Well, they have deniers in the Nazi, in that philosophy, right? Because what do they call them? Holocaust deniers. They deny that Jews were killed, or at least it wasn't 6 million. They say, well, it's only a few thousand. Same thing, deny, deny, deny. Okay? But eugenics, huge part of that's where that whole thing came from of trying to make us the descendants of monkeys. We said we ain't had nothing to do with no apes. Get out of here. You know. But that's another one. Now, here's a concept that is part of what kept racism alive and flourishing. It was called miscegenation. Miscegenation. Now, what is miscegenation? Briefly put, miscegenation is the process of making racial mixing not just a crime, but to make it abhorrent, something that would just a worst thing in the world, miscegenation, race mixing. Now, here's what's so ugly about it. Um, White men could rape any woman they wanted. Black, white, Japanese, Native American. That was the quote, white man's right. Miscegenation had to do with men other than whites uh, being in relationships with white women. That's what that was about. That's all it was about. Okay. After the Civil War, there was a huge anti-miscegenation movement. Look at these. This was called the miscegenation ball. And if you notice, it's all black women with white men. Okay? Um, because you ain't gonna see no black man with no white woman because they lynch those. All right? So understand this was a part of it too. So this was psychological and legal. Uh, this graphic right there is from a Book of Mormon. You see? So they tried to play it publicly, they tried to play it off that white men did not find black women attractive. And it was like, the idea was like if they had sex with a black woman, it was like having sex with an animal. But secretly, that's what they did. They raped, pillaged, and plundered black women. That was, in fact, that was part of what they call it the rites of passage for white boys, is to have sex with a black woman. So they sometimes, a bunch of white men get together with the young white boy and take him out and go grab a black woman, didn't matter who. She had to, grab a black woman and beat her. And sometimes they would rape her first and then say, okay, now you have sex with her, and that'll make you a man. Sometimes they would kill the sister. You know, sometimes they didn't kill her, they let her stay alive so that she could be shamed. And they knew that that would cause her to be just ostracized, just a terrible, terrible, terrible. Oh, I don't even want to go there. But it's just the kind of stuff they did. All right, that was miscegenation. So they make words up for concepts on stuff. Miscegenation. That moves us to another level. Blackface and minstrel shows. Blackface and minstrel shows. Um, and we still have this going on to this day. Blackface and minstrel shows. The idea was it wasn't just for entertainment. This was psychological. It was to create this idea that black people were clowns. They were less than human. They were ignorant. And so white people put on blackface pretending to be black folks. And you see that right there? That's Judy Garland. People you would not even thought about did blackface. Of course, we know about Al Jolson and stuff like that, but they had whole TV, they had films, stage shows, and stuff with blackface, and the minstrel shows, the early minstrel shows with white people singing songs that they said would sound like black people. Look at that dude, Big Minstrel Jubilee. That's Ted Danson. And this is one of the beefs that I will not forgive Whoopi Goldberg for. She was going with him, and at a roast, one of these roasts that they had for Whoopi Goldberg, Ted Danson showed up in blackface. And what did Whoopi do? She laughed. She thought it was real funny. And I'll never forget it because I actually saw part of that roast when Ted Danson did his jokes and stuff. He compared her to a monkey and talked about how they had monkey sex. That's Bing Crosby, by the way, right there. We'll come back to that later, but that's Bing Crosby in a famous movie. What can I say? So whenever you see these white kids in college and high schools doing a blackface bit, and they always want to say, "Oh, we didn't know it was racist." That's from a minstrel show in Great Britain that went on until the 1970s. Um, they know that stuff. They know exactly what they're doing. And if you believe them when they say, "Oh, I didn't mean no harm. I apologize," they learn this. They learn that you do it, and then if you get cracked, you just say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know." They know. Lying. Okay, so blackface and minstrel shows. All right, then another area was anti-voting. Disenfranchisement is what you call it, disenfranchisement. Primarily in the South through poll taxes, literacy tests, violence, and the grandfather clause. Right? Um, that's a literacy test, and if I blew it up, it wouldn't do any good because you wouldn't be able to answer it. The questions were stupid, and they only gave them to black people. That was a receipt for the poll tax. Okay, they did all kinds of stuff to keep us from voting, and of course, they did murder us. They did murder us. We tried to vote, tried to register to vote, just registering. And that went on, of course, until the 60s, 70s, and now it's happening again because the Republicans have been vicious in the 2000s in disenfranchising us through all kinds of stuff, zoning and what is it, I, uh, voter ID, all kind of silly stuff. Okay, so again, understand these are all the things so far. And I'm almost finished, but all these different ways in which we were oppressed and they kept us from being able to just simply be citizens. See, when you take it and you look at one thing and you look at a couple of things, you say, "Oh, well, that wasn't that bad." When you start looking at all the things that they were doing, all the things, see, sundown towns, sundown towns. We talked about this, and but if you don't know about it, that's something else you want to look up. Sundown towns were towns where black people better be gone by sundown. And it was open. Don't let the sun set on you here. Understand? People would be run out of town or even murdered, beat. And so you knew if you ran across certain signs and certain stuff, no, I better be gone by sundown. Yeah, I ain't got to go on long about that very long because it's simple as that. They had towns where you were not welcome after sundown. You can come in there in the daytime and work, but you better be gone by sundown. All right? All right, now here's an area that we don't often think of it this way, but sports. One of the things that white folks did, they purposely would not allow black folks to participate in their sports because they did not want black folks and white folks to be mingled together as spectators. It wasn't just about keeping the sport white, it was about keeping it white even to the people who came to see the sports. So, for an example, in terms of horse racing, for many years after the Civil War, the most prominent jockeys were black, but that put them too close in proximity to white people. So around the turn of the century, or a little bit after the turn of the century in the 1900s, they started banning black jockeys from white horse racing. Yeah. Now, there's a tribute supposedly to black jockeys. When you see those black jockeys, lawn jockeys as they call them, that's supposed to be a throwback to the days when you had black jockeys. And for a long time, because we didn't see any, we didn't think that there had ever been any. But yeah, that was one of the reasons they didn't want us in proximity to white people. Uh, Unless you were truly in a very, very subservient position. But as horse racing took on the big money, they definitely didn't want no black people doing the racing because we're not supposed to be capable. Before I get to baseball, I got to mention about hockey, ice hockey. Um, there was a Negro Hockey League up in Canada that was very strong. In fact, they were the ones who modernized ice hockey. Ice hockey was started actually by Native Americans, and then white folks were doing it, but also black folks were doing it, and they are the ones who made it innovative. The slap shot and other things that they did brought it into a whole nother era, and then they wiped them out. They wiped them out of history books, wiped them out. It wasn't until maybe 20 years ago, some people doing some studying on some things, research, and came across the Negro Hockey League. Yeah. Of course, we know about Negro baseball. The Negro Baseball League was huge. Why was it so huge? Because we was good. But it was also because we were locked out of the white baseball leagues. And so you have the fanciful story that Branch Rickey brought Jackie Robinson into Major League Baseball because he felt that it was time and all that. No, he did it because they needed to break the Negro Baseball League because it was so huge. You see these pictures, these graphics, the East West All Star game and the World Series of Negro Baseball. That's a World Series game, Negro Baseball right there. You see all them people in that stand? Those are all black people. In Chicago, they used to have the East West Classic. In fact, they had it at Comiskey Park, and it was so huge. Black people came from around the world. They stayed in black-owned hotels and what we call what do you call them, B&Bs now? Black folks who rented out rooms and stuff. The black folks couldn't stay at the white hotels, but right there, see all the people? This was huge. And they were outdrawing the white leagues. So they said, no, 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 we got to do something about this. So they started hiring away the black players and then broke the league, the Negro Baseball League. There was also a Negro basketball league, and stuff, all of that. Now, we know about the Pullman Porters, but what we don't really know a lot about is how that was a scheme. The dude Pullman, who manufactured the Pullman rail cars, he wanted people to be able to. This was the primary source of transportation for white businessmen in those time periods, in the 20s, 10s, and 20s and 30s, even into the 40s. He purposely went and originally and went and got ex-slaves to be Pullman porters, or to be the porters, and depending on your skin color would be your rank and what you would do. So many times, the lightest black men would be the ones that served in the cars, etc., and all of that. It was real color coded, and he worked them like worse than slaves because they had to pay for their own uniforms and all this stuff. He half paid them, but black people being what black people do, Pullman porters became one of the most revered and respected members of the black working class. And even though they worked terrible hours, be gone for days, they worked hard and they provided for their families. Now, I like to point out that during that same period, there was only two major things that the black working class were allowed to do. The men could be Pullman porters, which was primarily looking after white men, and the domestic industry, which was black women who took care of the white folks' homes and working primarily for the white woman in her home. Those were the two biggest industries for black folks. Never thought about it like that, did you? Yeah. And see that what's the difference between that and slavery? Not a lot. They paid a little bit more, but we were still working for white people. And in fact, that's where the whole hair pressing thing came into being for black women, because working in the white folks' homes, the white woman said, "You got to press your hair. You can't come up here with that with them naps. You can't wear your hair natural in my house." And so the black women had to press their hair. That's why um, C.J. Walker, Madam C.J. Walker, that's why she was so successful, because she made it a lot easier for black women to press their hair, which they needed to do in order to go around white people, especially around white women. See, all that stuff be connected. It ain't nothing accidental. But the Pullman Porters, what that did, it helped perpetuate the idea of us being subservient, because they were always subservient, very nice, and they took care of them white men, you know. And it was, oh, their working hours and working conditions was terrible, you know. Anyway, okay, let me move on. Segregated schools, educational system, one of the biggest ways that they uh, kept us down. By the way, that's Linda Brown, Brown versus the Board of Education. And we went through so much just trying to get desegregated education. It wasn't integrated, it was desegregated. There's a difference, because public schools are paid for by all of our tax money. And so the idea had been but equal for so long, but it wasn't really equal. So in order to make it equal, we had to force our way into school. It's Ruby Bridges. So we had to be, in some cases, in order to, quote, desegregate the schools, we had to send our children into vicious situations. I really feel for this. I feel so bad now, because black folks, in order to get to see that their children could get a better education, I think we made a mistake in forcing our way to sit next to white children, because as many of us who had the joy of being taught by black teachers in black schools, even though the equipment might not have been as good and the facilities might not have been as good, what they taught us and how they taught us to be the best. And what happened was this: the folks who call themselves going to poll tax receipt for a minute. I'll see if I can come back to that, Clyde. I can't freeze it, but I'll see if I can pull it up in a separate thing. Okay. Um, what I was going to say is this. See, for the longest time, because black folks teaching black children taught us to be the best. And so that was our criteria, to be the best at whatever we were doing. If we picked up trash, we was doing it the best. If we were in school, it was to be the best. Now, once this idea of, quote, integration got snuck in, they stopped recognizing. In other words, white folks now are deciding who to recognize. And so what started happening was, instead of recognizing the best, they decided to recognize the first Negro to do this, the first Negro to do that, the first Negro that, and the first Negro this. It no longer had to be the best Negro, it was simply being the first. And sometimes, in fact, more than sometimes, it wasn't the best that black person could do, or even the best black person. It was whoever they picked. And what that did was, it allowed for people who were not focused on being the best to become exceptionalized. And that's where they tell you, oh, you the first one to do this. You special. You ain't like the other blacks. And it took them off focus. So now they weren't trying to be the best. They were basking in the sunshine of these white folks telling, ooh, you special, you special. And they set them up. Set them up. See, they don't like to talk about that. But anyway, that was the game. All right. Now, advertising. Oh, they did a job on us with advertising too, because it didn't just give white folks an ugly attitude about us. It also gave us an ugly attitude about us. You see, we came to believe a lot of things ourselves. Yes, it's genuine hires. That's a root beer for those that don't know. Nigger hair, long cut tobacco. See, for so many years, it was nothing that stopped them from doing all the worst kind of advertisements and stereotyping that you want to believe. Uncle Remus, this show am good syrup. Okay? Eyes in town, honey. Ain't your mama on the pancake box? You know, do I need to say more? I mean, I could have got 1,000 different ads that were just racist as hell. But they did that. Actually, they did. They got still got some racist advertisements running today. Anyway, this is the last area here. Hollywood. Hollywood. Hmm, there's in Hollywood. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. Holiday Inn. When I showed you back a while ago the blackface with Bing Crosby, that was in this movie called Holiday Inn. Okay, uh, they were vicious with that stuff. Vicious. That's the movie called Gods and Generals. See, we had so many, and of course, there's Mandingo, right? See, we had so many things, so many movies and TV shows and stuff that were just racist. Just straight up, there's a little child. This is a graphic from a movie called White Dog, and in the movie, the dog had been trained to attack just black people. There's Bing Crosby in blackface. Okay, uh, and to hear them tell it, oh, it was just the times then. No, you had a choice. You could choose not to do that. Okay. Um, so the point is that Hollywood was big time for stereotypes and just straight up racism. Okay. Um, hmm. Yeah, the soldiers and all the artifacts and stuff, all the soldiers, statues and monuments and markers throughout the country that honored Confederate soldiers and the Confederacy. That's part of the same thing, the brainwashing, the part of the lost cause. Okay. Um, and as I close, I just want to emphasize again or re-emphasize why this is important. How the Negroes lived under slavery. Now that's from the state of Virginia. It's a textbook came out in the 1960s. Yeah, when he comes back around, look at it again. That's what they said. Uh, how the Negroes lived under slavery. So we need to understand that this is not new. When you saw and when you see the resident at these huge rallies with these hate-filled people, that's not new. It's a rekindling of it. As I said many times, he's a hate monger. A hate monger stirs up anger and hatred of people against others. And if he's not a hate monger, I don't know what one is. The lost cause. Don't you just feel so bad for those Confederate soldiers? Nope. Um, but again, when you look at all the different things that were done and some are still being done to us to keep us from progressing, to keep us from reaching equality, that's all we ever wanted. We just wanted to be able to be treated equally. We didn't ask for nothing special, okay? But part of being able to be treated equally also means that you have to do some repair, some reparations for what was done to you in unfairness. And when you take people and you work them for 300 years or more with no pay, and this is why I want to do this today. We just left a period of time where the federal government, run by the resident, they stopped paying many of the federal workers. They furloughed some. In other words, told them don't come back to work till we tell you. And then others, they told them keep coming to work even if we ain't paying you. And it took them a minute, but they finally said, hold up, how you gonna make us come to work and you ain't paying us? How are we supposed to get there? You see, they learned that slavery can come in sneaky ways. They started seeing themselves as, wait a minute, this is slavery here. And they started reacting against it. And what really caused the resident to have to give in was when they started with the air traffic, whether the air traffic controls and the TSA agents and all of that, when they started fighting back. And they started saying, no, 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 this ain't right. You can't make us work when we ain't got no money. Think about that for 300 years that they did to us. And then at the end said, oh, well, ain't nothing we can do. We gonna pay your slave owners, former slave owners, for the loss of y'all, but we ain't giving y'all nothing. 40 acres and a mule, well, that was just an idea. Yeah, I want my 40 acres and a mule. All right. Thank you so much, and be sure to share this with others so they can learn something about our true history. And as always, I say, no justice, no peace, no love, KNOW.